What's going on, everybody? It's FREEDO here for Your Overwatch. If you missed out on the Stage 2 finals, man, you missed a very sick day of Overwatch League. Also, this video is largely going to spoil it for you, so be warned about that. What an epic day. 10 maps of incredibly intense and high-level Overwatch. Everyone played their minds out. And today we're going to talk specifically about DPS players, but in reality, of course, as we know, the tank and support core of all of the teams played really well and are debatably even more important than the DPS players. A big reason why the Philadelphia Fusion got as far as they did is because their main tank Fraggy, I think, like, leveled up twice somehow in the course of a couple months. Massive improvement, and now all of a sudden Philadelphia Fusion has the potency in order to compete with some of the best teams in the world, which is incredible. Specifically on the point of DPS, we're going to discuss a bit who's in contention for this and what parameters I'm going to define who I think is the best, but of course, these types of conversations can go on for hours. Depending on what you value more, you're going to come up with a different answer, but I'll try my best to explain what I think. And then after that, we're going to break down some really cool team fights from the finals day to help better appreciate some of the massive plays that were getting made by everybody on that day. First and foremost, I do want to say that Prophet and Birdring for the London Spitfire had a bit of an off day, and it's a bit unfair to try to weigh that too heavily when their careers otherwise are studded with insane performances. One bad day doesn't ruin their careers. However, overall, over the course of both stages, I think the assumed accolade of having the best DPS players in the league going to the London Spitfire, especially now that Rascal got traded off the team, I can confidently say doesn't rest in their court anymore. It's a lot more difficult to talk about the one best DPS player, I'll do that too, but I think overall, the best roster of talent is actually on the Philadelphia Fusion. As they've shown, I think, quite convincingly, having a tracer specialist that can come in Snillo. Shadowburn somehow isn't good enough to start on this team, which doesn't make any sense. I think he could still come in, especially if they ever want to incorporate the Pharah again, especially on control maps. EQO's got a wide range of heroes, which is why he's getting started over Shadowburn a bit more. And then, of course, Carpe is a tracer ace and a Widowmaker ace. Now, I'll get on to who I think is the best in just a second, but I have to, of course, contextualize with the rest of this. In the finals against NYXL, you'd have to start to add in the conversation for Sabyeobe and Libero, where Libero pulled out a competitive Widowmaker out of seemingly nowhere. I've watched this guy play Overwatch for years now, I think, since the Apex days. Never played Widowmaker, more of like a tech flex pick DPS guy, pulling out the Mei, the Junkrat, Genji, Pharah, Hanzo, you name it, and now adding a Widowmaker that can solidify NYXL's defensive play without taking Sabyeobe off of the tracer makes him a really dominant threat, and I think he deservedly won the MVP for the finals upon winning it. However, I'm going to argue that I think Carpe is actually the best DPS in the world because, at least right now in the competitive meta, the top two heroes you need to have your carry player on are Tracer and Widowmaker. And luckily, NYXL is able to get away with this being the case because Sabyeobe is just so darn good at Tracer, and Libero came up big on the Widowmaker when it mattered. So the blind spots of each other is sort of getting covered in that way, whereas if I had to pick just one player, it would have to be Carpe. I think Carpe has quietly been the best DPS in the Overwatch League from the first two stages, bailing out some pretty bad tank play in stage 1, still somehow making Philly a really competitive team, and now with upgraded tank play at the end of stage 2, really allowed for their controlling style to compete with some of the highest IQ Overwatch teams in the league. Now, I say this, of course, knowing full well that Carpe and the rest of the Fusion to some degree did look a bit fatigued as they started to lose that reverse sweep to NYXL. After Libero won a couple Widow duels, it kind of seemed like Carpe was a bit afraid to go at him with it again. We didn't see him pull it out again on Gibraltar when I think that was the obvious choice that they should have went with. To some degree, though, you only got so much gas in the tank. It'd make my argument a lot easier if they ended up fragging out to the end of that series, but I think even with a valiant effort taking them to the distance, as well as the resume that Carpe's built up for himself, I think this guy is number one, at least until the meta changes, and I think that's really important as well. The thing about being valued really highly in Overwatch is that you're only as good as your best heroes take you, which makes it even more impressive that a guy like Libero can pull out a key hero like Widowmaker into his hero pool and just grind it and obviously get to a spot where he can compete with anybody on it. But at least for me, I think if Libero fought Carpe at the start of the day instead of at the last few maps of the day after a long grind, it wouldn't have been that convincing. And also as well, even though Libero earned the MVP for the Stage 2 finals, he also was a big reason why they ended up floundering in Stage 1 when London reverse swept them. He really got shut down on the Genji, which I think makes it hard to value him as the best overall when Carpe's looked great in both stages. And of course, quietly in the background is Sabyeobe, who has the best tracer in the world. NYXL have only dropped a couple series thus far, largely based on that play as well, which perhaps means you could value him over Carpe, but I think Carpe's Widow puts up his player value beyond that point even. So, okay, now that that incredibly impossible debate has been had, let's move on to breaking down some clips. This will particularly showcase how much better the Fusion's ability to control fights has become. It was normal that Fraggy would die in the first few seconds of every fight, which just can't happen if you're trying to play around a Widowmaker. And on the whole, the mid-round shot calling for Fusion has been improved immensely. Here they're controlling the engagement, which is to say they're not committing enough to give up their bodies to a shot that could insta-kill them, and instead holding the cart, feeling out where the enemies are, making sure they collect all their cooldowns, and then they slowly start to edge up space. And all the while in this brawl, I want you to keep a keen eye on the payload meter. The tanks dive in, they actually get focused quite heavily, but Carpe takes the opportunity to go for a incredibly difficult shot, hook-shotting over the top, nailing the enemy Widowmaker in the head. This allows for a res battle to happen on both sides. Tank comes back, Widow comes back, but stalling out that fight that entire time meant that the bunker comp couldn't really come contest the cart. The cart gets almost all the way to the checkpoint anyway, and if we just left it at that, you probably could say even after a regroup, this would have been a fairly successful push from the Fusion. But because they have to dedicate resources to go take care of Carpe, Snillo is allowed to clean up on the underside. That's a really cool example of a way that an engagement can be broken open, because if you think about the bunker comp, they don't want to be fighting in a circle. They don't want the dive to be able to come all around them. The way the bunker comp works is being able to focus fire the things in front of them, make use of that Orisa barrier, Halt and Junkrat and all that. But as soon as the fight is developed into the open space, you're just not locking down this tracer. I mean, they have nothing to kill it beyond this point. They really had to better win the fight at the choke or on the cart, get themselves backed into maybe one of the little tunnels near the payload so they could be in a better defensive setup. Overall, a really cool engagement from the Fusion to break that defensive stronghold. A lot of it on the back of that cool, calm, collected headshot that Carpe got over the top to break everything wide open. Even though it got resurrected, it pulled resources out of the NYXL so they couldn't respond with brawling or committing to the cart without their healer. It kind of froze them in place and allowed for the mobility characters to just spin circles around the bunker. Now this next engagement in streets, NYXL is setting up for a retake, and both teams are actually fairly low in ultimates. And if anything, you'd have to say NYXL have the advantage largely with the respawn advantage, a little bit of an ult advantage here, but on the back of Carpe and really good mid-fight discipline and shot calling out of the Fusion, they're able to control the situation. Snillo is poking, harassing, avoiding damage himself, not committing too hard, but just trying to get as much damage as he can do without going down or taking too much heat. By doing this, he helps aid to get some damage in on Mano, and Carpe finishes him off out in the distance. This provokes a response for Jonak to pop Transcendence to get the Resurrect off on Arc, and the only thing at that point that could have been done is if Carpe somehow found a headshot onto the Mercy, doesn't find it off screen. Mano's back, uses Primal Rage to go after the Widowmaker, but at this point then, Boombox on the Fusion side has his own Transcendence advantage. They press that forward with Fraggy to go get the enemy Mercy player. And keep in mind, Libero is charging his way up to a Dragon Blade. Even though the Fusion are advantaged here, if Libero gets up to this blade and pulls it out, you never know. Magic can happen. We've seen it before. That Dragon Blade, with a little bit of stall, could save this entire Streets phase defense, but Carpe deletes him, despite getting knocked around the world by Mano's Primal Rage. Largely the grappling hook for Widowmaker is the reason why she's so strong right now for that type of example. It puts her mobility so much higher and so much more regular than it used to be that the dive characters don't simply hard counter Widow anymore. She definitely has the tools in order to outposition them and still get her value nowadays. nowadays if you're good enough to do so. The thing I love about these engagements is that we don't see Snillo making a single mistake. You don't see Fraggy overstaying his welcome until he has Transcendence in order to heal him to commit to get the Mercy. And of course, your boy Carpe hits the clutch shot, removing the only potential remaining win condition that NYXL could have had. Probably didn't know that he was going to have a Dragon Blade, but of course, anytime you're able to pick off the enemy's DPS, it's a really big kill, because without it, there's often not enough punching power to even lose a fight if the enemy don't have damage and you do, especially not clutching one back. The next clip we're going to look at is more praising of NYXL this time, also on a Streets phase, which I think typically shows off the real complexity of dive comps because there's so much high ground involved, so much open space for the mobility characters to make plays and make use of the space that the map provides for them. And this time, of course, comes after the Fusion take the first 2 maps. NYXL had the opportunity to go back, take a look at what was going wrong, and make the key adjustment, and that adjustment was putting Libero on the Widowmaker paired with the Mercy, which really amps up your Widowmaker's effectiveness. I cannot stress that enough, because if you lose the pick battle, you can get rezzed, and the speed at which that you get a lethal shot with the damage amp in your pocket really speeds up the tempo of how you're allowed to play Widowmaker. And in a Widow duel, the one that has a Mercy is allowed to peak a lot faster, a lot more brash, knowing she has an extra life, of course, but also that her scope is going to require less charge in order to be deadly. You can just see how much more afraid Carpe has to play now that he doesn't have the Mercy pocket of his own, and Libero does. Libero's much more aggressive in these peaks, knowing that even if he doesn't land the one-hit kill, Carpe is going to be so much down in life that it would be much easier to pounce anyway, and the healing takes a lot longer to get on Carpe as well. Here on the ground, the support ultimates get traded, and it's not really a good trade. Fraggy's inching up to get a backline dive, which he finds it successfully without even having to jump in, which is the best way to engage with Winston, by the way, having your leap cooldown available to be able to jump out. That adaptation really leveled up Fraggy's play, but Jonak's Transcendence comes in time, and Neptuno responds with the sound barrier, but as the attacking team, you really want to leverage those ultimates in order to press an advantage rather than stalemate, because both teams were basically invincible for a little bit of point in time. Then Carpe kind of tries to force peeking this angle and opens up the entire fight to be forgotten. After using the sound barrier, they do end up swapping to the Mercy, which is going to give Carpe a lot more power in these Widow peaks, but now with a minute and a half left, they're back are really pushed up against the wall. Yanis uses Primal Rage almost exclusively to knock them off the high ground, and then with Libero's Widow Sight's ultimate, the Fusion were forced to play pretty scared, but it didn't help him out at all, because it just allowed Jonak to peek around the corner and pick up some sniper frags on his own. Keep in mind, as it was said on the broadcast at the time, Jonak at this moment had gold damage, which shouldn't be too surprising because a lot of the time, Libero isn't going to be hitting a lot of tanks, which I know we've talked about gold damage a lot before, but for your reference, usually the player who's got gold damage is the one who fights tanks most often. Whoever's shooting tanks more likely is going to have the most damage done, and Libero most of the time is going to be not shooting, in fact, but battling for angles and positioning against Carpe's Widow, and Sabyeobe is not really able to dive too hard because the enemy's got a Mercy, has to wait for the engagement to come, so Jonak can sort of just sit here and spam from range and get a lot of work done, which is how this pivoting defense control comp is supposed to work, really. The Zenyatta does become a star, and the player that's going to be doing the majority of the heavy lifting range damage, which is allowed for by the Widowmaker winning the ranged snipe battle up top, because if you don't have that, Jonak's probably getting sniped by the enemy Widow. You need your Widow to win the footsie battle against their Widow, hopefully the snipe battle as well, that allows for a player like Jonak to really clean up the fights on the floor. We'll take a look at how the NYXL take this Streets phase again. Janice is content with getting, like, I would say, a pretty low impact with this Primal Rage, but a big positioning win, having contested and removed those lines of sight from the Widowmaker, and tying up the healer and the Widow. Might look like low impact on paper, but allows for the rest of NYXL to take a 5v4 on the rest of the fight. They clean that up. By the time the Widowmaker even can get into position to meaningfully impact the fight, it's already been lost. Libero frags Carpe anyway, and NYXL really show off what the control of the map can do in order to lead you towards your win condition. Some really excellent stuff. Well, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope from watching these 2 clips that I broke down, you can see the importance of shutting down Carpe, kind of adding to the point that I think he's the best player in the world right now. Minimizing his impact is the win condition for beating the Fusion, which NYXL was able to adapt to in their reverse sweep against the Fusion. Keep in mind, the Fusion were like a couple team fights away from taking this whole thing away and surprising us us even further than they already had. Ran out of gas at the end, but either way, a really good show. I'm going to make another video on the finals to show a little bit more about what went wrong with London and to break down some more of the insane plays. So if you're excited for that video and you enjoyed this one, you want to see more pro analysis, always be sure to leave a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content, gives me motivation to keep working hard to produce these. They take a ton of work, guys. I love doing it, but it's many hours to get these together. Let me know your thoughts on who's the best DPS player in the world in the comment section down below, and be sure that you don't miss our next uploads. So hit subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so that you get actually notified when the videos come out. I know you gotta like basically subscribe twice on YouTube. I don't understand it either, but hit the bell icon so it actually tells you when our videos come out. Also follow us on Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, dank memes, Overwatch League predictions, and all sorts of other stuff. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.